Today we're going to talk about Spanish past tense verbs, preterite and imperfect. So preterite versus imperfect. In Spanish, there's two different ways we conjugate past tense verbs, preterite tense and imperfect tense. Today we're going to dive into what is different between the two, when you use each one, and how you conjugate it. Here you can see a table comparing the usages of preterite and imperfect. The major difference, which you can see up here, is that preterite is completed action and imperfect is uncompleted actions. Then you can remember the rest of the ways each is used with the acronyms tacos for preterite and radish, but with a Y, for imperfect. Let's start with the preterite. T for terminates and begins, then an interruption, a chain of events. It occurs for a number of times or something specific, like the time. Then, for the imperfect, it's R for repetition, then action in progress, descriptions, youth, set a scene, or when you tell the hour and date. The difference between the specific time and the hour and date is that a specific time would be like, I went to the store at 12:30, whereas hour and date, which is imperfect, would be, it was 12:30. So, other info. Imperfect verbs kind of sound like used to. I used to go to the park every Wednesday. Instead of saying used to go, you would just conjugate the verb to go, or ir, for imperfect tense, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Here, you can also see a table of certain words that accompany preterite tense and imperfect tense. So here, the preterite words would be ayer, yesterday, anteayer, the day before yesterday, a la una, a las dos, a las tres, etc., at 2, at 3, etc., etc., anoche, last night, anteanoche, the night before last, esta mañana, this morning, esta tarde, this afternoon, la semana pasada, last week, el mes pasado, last month, el fin de semana pasado, last weekend, el año pasado, last year. Then the imperfect words would be a veces, which is sometimes, a menudo, often, cada día, each day, and this would be anything like each, whatever. So you can replace the word día with any word and followed by cada. So it could be like cada año, cada whatever. En esa época, at that time, mientras, while, todos los días, every day, and cuando era niño, when I was a child or when I was a kid. So now let's get into the conjugations. You probably already know present tense conjugations, or that ER, IR, and AR verbs are conjugated differently. So we're going to use the infinitives, the verbs, hablar, comer, and vivir. Verbs can only end in AR, ER, and IR. There aren't any other options. In fact, ER and IR verbs are conjugated the same way. So let's just go over AR first. So pronombre, which is pronoun, they are listed here, and here's the conjugation. So, yo hablé, tú hablaste, él, ella, usted habló, nosotros hablamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaron, vosotros, and then we can kind of ignore this vosotros section because unless if you're studying in Spain. And then for comer and vivir, the ER and IR endings, this would be yo comí or yo viví, tú comiste and tú viviste, él, ella, usted comió, él, ella, usted vivió, nosotros comimos o vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comieron o vivieron, and then vosotros we can ignore again. So what you can notice here is that the I stays in the IR ending, but the E turns into an I. Because what would you say? You're comeste? That doesn't make sense. It would be comiste. You change it. So in the imperfect tense, the same thing applies with AR verbs and then ER and IR verbs. So here's the conjugation. So yo hablaba, tú hablabas, él, ella, usted hablaba, nosotros hablábamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaban, and then same thing applies for vosotros as well. And then for ER and IR, comer and vivir, yo comía, yo vivía, tú comías, tú vivías, él, ella, usted comía o vivía, nosotros comíamos o vivíamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comían o vivían, and then same thing with vosotros, as I said. So now let's get on to some examples. So preterite, as stated, is typically identified as a completed action. So we're going to review some completed actions. For example, yo, anoche yo blank la basura para mis papás porque soy buen hijo. So the action is I took out the trash, or anoche yo blank la basura para mis papás. So, I took out the trash. That's a completed action, and therefore the word sacar should be conjugated for yo in the preterite tense. That would be saqué. And I know this was a weird example because it doesn't actually follow the rules in the last slide, but if there are verbs that end in car, gar, zar, so C-A-R, G-A-R, or Z-A-R, they end slightly differently. So I know this was a little bit of a confusing example and a little bit advanced, but the point of this example was that you need to know that I took out the trash was a completed action, and therefore the verb should be conjugated in the preterite tense. So here's the next example. So now, Héctor y Miguel no blank el puente al mundo de los vivos. So this is also a completed action. Don't be tripped up because it has the word no in it. So Héctor y Miguel would represent the pronoun ellos. So pause this video and think about how to conjugate cruzar for ellos in the preterite tense. So that would be cruzaron. Héctor y Miguel no cruzaron el puente al mundo de los vivos. Then the next example would be ayer los alumnos no blank la tarea en Blackboard y ahora todos tienen Fs en clase. So again, the students didn't see the homework. That's a completed action. Again, pause this video, think of how to conjugate ver in this context. Right, so alumnos would be ellos. Like we said, Héctor y Miguel is also ellos. So it'd be conjugated for vieron. Ayer los alumnos no vieron la tarea. They didn't see the homework. And then lastly, los alumnos blank a la panadería. So they went to the bakery. As we said, alumnos is ellos, and then los alumnos fueron a la panadería. It is also an irregular verb in the preterite tense, so it turns into fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, y fueron. So that's a little bit of a confusing one as well. That's why I gave you the answer. But the point is, for all of these examples really, is that you understand that they're completed actions, and so therefore they should be conjugated in the preterite tense. So they went to the bakery. That's completed, it's over, like it has nothing to do with the present tense. So now let's get into the traits of imperfect. So repetition is a trait of imperfect. So ella blank al supermercado con su mamá cada domingo. So cada domingo tells us it's repetitive. So what is ir for ella in the imperfect tense? It's iba. Don't be tripped up because ir is irregular in the preterite, like we talked about in the last slide here. So ir turns into fueron. It does not turn into fueron for imperfect tense. It just turns into iba. And then here, as I said, cada domingo indicates repetition. And cada is also one of the words that we discussed that also imply imperfect. So here would be the example of action in progress. So, tú blank doblando en la calle cuando la policía te paró. So, how would you conjugate estar for to in the preterite tense? Estabas. So a trick to remember this is that any ing verb is action in progress. So here you were turning. Tú estabas doblando. So, because doblando means turning. So that action in progress signifies the imperfect tense. In Spanish, ing is ando or yendo. So anything ending with like ndo right here, like doblando is the example. So now let's talk about descriptions. So, ella blank muy triste por tener que tomar una prueba en la clase de español. So, muy triste, very sad, is a description. So estar should be conjugated in the imperfect tense because, right, it's a description. So how would you do that here? How would you conjugate estar for ella in imperfect? Estaba, it would be estaba. So now let's talk about the example of youth. So, nosotros blank, niños muy tercos y mandones. Remember, ser is also an irregular verb that turns into era, eras, era, éramos, eran. So this would be nosotros éramos niños muy tercos y mandones. The fact that this person is saying that we were very stubborn and bossy kids shows that they're talking about their childhood, their youth. So this is another example of what we mean when we say you use imperfect tense when talking about your youth. So here, éramos niños signifies youth. And now finally, what to remember. Imperfect is uncompleted actions and preterite is completed actions. Car, gar, zar verbs are always irregular. And in order to successfully use each tense, you need to get accustomed to the conjugations and when to use them by memorizing the charts provided. And I don't really want to say memorizing because it shouldn't be like that. It should really more be getting used to when and how to use each type of verb. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. Gracias por viendo. Espero que aprendiste algo.